So I'm going to come out with a confession at the beginning of this video. I have something to get off of my chest. I've been ever the optimist so far since starting this channel. I kind of went back and looked back through the first few videos that we've done on Michigan football since starting this channel. And I do want to thank everybody for helping us get over 500 subscribers already. Really, really appreciate you all. By the way, like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. We'd really appreciate it. I went back and I saw just how much hype we've pumped into the ether for Michigan football in 2026. But I do want to also kind of qualify this at the same time, too, because I do think this team is deserving of a lot of that hype. And I've highlighted the areas of this team I'm really confident in. I've highlighted specific players. You know, we've talked about John Henry Daly. We've talked about Lugard Adapai. We've talked about Rod Moore coming back fully healthy. We've talked about Bryce Underwood and how I think he can indeed and will flourish in this new offensive system. We've talked about the offensive line. We've talked about Savion Hyder, Jordan Marshall, Andrew Marsh, yada, yada, yada. The list goes on and on and on. And that's kind of the point to the preseason, right? In the preseason, hope springs eternal. You know, every team, according to their fan base, is going to win the national title. And well, I think it's a time of year for us all to talk and to think about how passionate we all are about our teams as college football fans. This is the time to be optimistic. But I did also want to stop and pause and reflect and do what I believe is my due diligence to you fans of the Michigan football team and what I think you are owed and what you deserve, because ultimately I do respect you guys as great fans, ball knowers out there, people who understand the game of college football. I like to pride myself on the fact that I'm a Michigan fan because my experience over the years and interacting with other Michigan fans is that there's a lot of ball knowers in this fan base, and I really like that. It's also why I'm extremely proud of the fact that I've gotten over 500 people to subscribe to this channel already since starting it, and I want to kind of do a video that just shows my respect for how much many of you understand the game of college football. Because in the game of college football, as many people, many of you watching will know, for every one thing on any given play or in any given game or over the course of any given season, for every one thing that can go right, there's a million things that can go wrong. And if I'm not talking about the millions of things that can go wrong, well, again, I'm not doing my due diligence. So in this video, I really just wanted to talk about some of the biggest question marks for this team. And that's really how I want to frame it, by the way. I don't want to frame them as so much of concerns, because let's admit it, we haven't seen a snap of Michigan football yet this season. We don't really know this team yet. We're just kind of getting little glimpses and details and clips of fall camp right now, but we'll get to know a lot about this team in the coming weeks as they do ultimately start their season. But I do have some questions. I do have some areas that I want to look at, that I'm going to be looking at and pay more attention to, I guess I should say. And that's what I want to talk about in this video. And again, if you guys don't mind clicking that like button real quick, that would greatly help this video get up into the algorithm, get more eyes on it, and help us grow. We're hoping to hit 1,000 subscribers sometime in the near future. But my first question mark for this team is Jay Hill's new defense. And now my concerns largely about this defense aren't really about the talent on this defense. Again, we've talked about Jair Hill, we've talked about John Henry Daly, Lugard Adapai, Nate Marshall, you know, some of the linebackers that do have potential, that can step up for this team, though I do think that will be one of the few weaknesses for this team talent-wise in the next season. We've talked about Rod Moore coming back. My concerns largely, having watched the film, and I have gone back and watched the film of Jay Hill's defense from last year, at BYU. Having watched the film, I see a little too much simplicity, honestly. I as a novice, you know, film watcher, a rather novice person when it comes to understanding different coverages and how different coverages are typically disguised. Well, watching BYU versus Texas Tech watching BYU versus Utah, which was an interesting matchup because it was Jay Hill's defense against Jason Beck's offense. Watching BYU in some of their bigger games last season, there were a lot of points where I was able to pause the tape, take a look at it, and see, oh, this looks like it's going to be cover 3, single high safety, corners playing a bit of off coverage because they have deep responsibility, yada, yada, yada. If you know anything about football, you know the signs of cover 3. Let's see what they rotate into post snap. And then sure enough, it's cover 3 on the back end. Or I think on any given play, okay, they got 2 high safeties. They're not split out too wide. Corners are, again, kind of playing off. This kind of looks like a cover 4 shell, but let's see what they rotate into. And it's a cover 4 shell. So the pre-snap to post-snap disguise in terms of the coverage, from what I've seen on film, isn't necessarily always there. Now, there are certainly ways in which they do disguise some things, and some people have noted Jay Hill's use of the quote-unquote rat player, as many describe them, as many, call them. That's when you have your nickel corner kind of take over a void that's left by a linebacker taking a deep responsibility, for instance, in like Tampa 2, things like that. There are little nuanced things that he does that are complex, but most of the disguise and the complexity of this defense is what Jay Hill is doing with the front 7, with like his pressure packages, his sim pressures, things like that. And one thing I did notice on film as well that's kind of a question mark, and dare I even say it, a concern of mine, is the fact that he relied on man coverage a lot at BYU. There were a lot of snaps where not only did I see, like I said, cover 3, I saw a bit of cover 4, which is something we haven't seen Michigan play for a long time, by the way. A little bit of cover 6, the quarter, half action. There was also a ton of press man and passing downs. I guess you could call it concern, would be, well, we've seen what Michigan is up against when they try to play man against the likes of their biggest rival in Ryan Day's Ohio State. Need I mention what happened when this team played Ohio State with Don Brown roaming the sidelines and calling a lot of press man himself? Now, is Jay Hill one to be, dare I say it, ignorant enough to, make those play calls? I hope not. Is he arrogant enough to dare to do that against Ryan Day in Ohio State, or against an Oregon, or against an Indiana, some of the more talented teams in this conference when it comes to quarterback and wide receiver play that can just pick apart man coverage all day with their kind of NFL style passing concepts? I'd hope that Jay Hill isn't. But as a good friend and confidant who happens to be a high school level coach himself, who knows many college coaches, once told me, and I've always kept this in the back of my mind when I'm thinking about these things, a lot of guys actually at the college and NFL levels, they kind of have their stuff. They have what they like to coach, and they stick to it. They stick to their schemes broadly. Because, a lot of these schemes are really, really, really difficult to teach. In any given week, it's not just a matter of, it sounds like this team is susceptible to cover 6, so we're just going to run cover 6 this week. Well, if you're a team that hasn't really ever run cover 6 or stuck to the rules of, specific rules and specific different schemes of running cover 6 in specific ways, you're going to get burned. So if Jay Hill does rely a bit on man coverage, that's kind of a red flag to me. It's kind of a question mark. And my other question with this defense really is, can the players are they picking up this new scheme quickly enough to really kind of avoid the typical mistakes synonymous with installing a new defense? Because let's be honest, though Jay Hill is a great defensive coordinator, and I give him all the credit in the world for that, though we can talk about this broadly with all the coaches on this roster, by the way, Kyle Whittingham, Jason Beck, Coy Detmer coaching the quarterbacks. They're all great coaches, but there is a trend in football broadly over the years and decades that when you're installing new things, there's a steep learning curve there, and I'm a little worried that it might take a little time. And, well, if you're Michigan this season, you don't have a lot of time, because early in the schedule you have Oklahoma. You have Minnesota, Iowa, teams like that are good teams that you honestly really can't overlook this season. with, don't even get me started with Iowa. Their fans generally, and their fans they're more intelligent fans that I like to rely on as good sources, are pretty high on them this season. And I know I'm speaking on Iowa's offense specifically, which maybe we need to wait and see if Iowa is capable of scoring in the double digits this season. But that's what I'm hearing. And overall, they're just a quality team that you could get into a rock fight with and have to make a stop at the end of the game in a 10-7 game. So I know I'm digressing a little bit here, but those are just kind of my question marks. Is the scheme up to snuff for the Big Ten? And can and are the players picking it up quickly enough to avoid the kind of typical growing pains that you see? Because Michigan can't afford too many of those with the schedule that they have. And speaking of the defense, my second point in this video is the defensive line. And it's largely going to be focused on the defensive tackle room generally. They still have Trey Pierce. They got David Palapale back there that a lot of people are high on this in this coaching staff. They got Eno Etta. Some guys, Alistair Vallejo looks like a freshman that could be a future Mason Graham. That's what a lot of people have referred to him as. I'm again in wait and see mode there. And Kyle Whittingham and company have hyped this defensive line unit to no ends so far heading into fall camp. But if you look back on last season, with a lot of the same players, though some of the guys have left, some of the couple of transfers that they had last season who transferred in just for last season are now gone, and others. Rayshon Benny is no longer here. But when you watch like Eno Etta on the field specifically, amongst others who are now back this season, Michigan was kind of, to steal a baseball term, just kind of a replacement level defensive tackle room. They were good, but they weren't great. And they weren't really average, which I guess is what you're kind of referring to when you use the term replacement level. But they were closer to average than they were good or great. They held their own, but they also gave up a lot of yards. You go back to like the USC game, even in the Ohio State game, and some of their more difficult games in the season, they gave up some big rushing plays right up the middle. And for this season, the concern there for me is, one, again, massively hyped, but I need to see it. I'm a show me kind of guy when it comes to this stuff, because I know Eno Etta is in the best shape of his career according to all the strength and conditioning people, but I've seen him for the past couple of years kind of get pushed around and not really know how to navigate double teams, when you're up against a team calling a lot of duo or a lot of those kind of gap scheme style plays. I just need to see it. And the concern there really is, I have to kind of also pair this with the linebacker room, which could be a weakness on this team. Losing Jimmy Rolder, losing Ernest Hausman, losing, a good bit of that room, namely those two and all that experience they had. You've got young linebackers, whoever it is, figuring to make their first starts in their college careers. And, they're liable to make rookie mistakes. And, anyone who knows ball will know that the linebacker position was essentially invented back in the day to stop the run, to fill in the gaps, or in modern college football, to scrape while the defensive end is crashing to come around and stop the quarterback run. Good linebacker play in the running game, against the running game, is really focused on hitting the right gap at the right time and recognizing what gap to hit. So if there's kind of a worst case scenario here where the defensive tackle room isn't up to that Kenneth Grant, Mason Graham, Mozzie Smith, Chris Jenkins level of just greatness, and then the linebackers behind them are making mistakes and not hitting the right gaps and not filling the right run fits, and they're giving up some gashing run plays. And as we all know, in the Big Ten, that's not a very good thing. Now, again, they've been massively hyped, and I do figure that they'll be a good defensive tackle unit. They won't be terrible by any means, but just good against this schedule is probably not going to cut it this season. And then we also have to flip over to the offensive line. We're talking about the defensive line. Now we have to talk about the offensive line. And I'm actually a lot more confident, I think, actually, in the offensive line putting it all together. They have a new offensive line coach coming over, Jim Harding, who is highly accredited, very well liked and loved around the world of college football. They have a ton of returning experience coming, or a ton of experienced players coming back, and they have the kind of X factor in Andrew Babalola, who may be starting at left tackle. I think the offensive line is filled with potential. It's filled with talent, and we saw the upside last season as they were able to effectively be a very, very good running offensive line. They did have some difficulties with pass protection. I was actually just watching the Brooks Austin breakdown of the Texas game for Bryce Underwood right before this, and he highlighted some plays himself in which Blake Frazier and Andrew Sprague both kind of got beat by Colin Simmons and some of those Texas edge rushers, though Colin Simmons was beating everybody last season. So, that's kind of, when you're judging a redshirt freshman tackle and his ability to block Colin Simmons, is kind of like judging a fish for its ability to climb a tree. This is not going to happen effectively, but they did struggle a bit with pass protection, but that's really not my main concern. I do think they'll get better there with the better coaching and with the experience. My question is, more so than any other unit on the field, the offensive line really has to have it all together and be on the same page. More so than the running backs, the wide receivers, more so even than the defensive line at times. The offensive line all really have to be on the same page, because one missed step on a pole, one misstep, when you're one of the pullers on an arc read or something like that. Though now that I think about, an arc read is the tight end coming across. But yeah, I think you guys get what I'm saying. On power, on pin and pull, on all those plays that Jason Beck likes to run, especially with a running quarterback, and the whole play falls apart. So the offensive line really has to play together as a unit, play disciplined, and they also can't afford to have those typical kinds of mistakes that you have when you're learning a new scheme and a new system. I've detailed it in other videos. Jason Beck's way of running the football is a lot different with all these read option type plays, arc read and stuff like that, midline read being in this playbook, as we saw with Devin Dampier at Utah last season. This is a steep learning curve for an offensive line that's still pretty young. My concern, again, isn't with the talent. They're all talented players, but they have to play together, they have to play on schedule, and they have to keep their heads on a swivel and know where they're all at. That's, again, an example of any one thing going right includes the possibility of any 5 or 10 things going wrong. And in this video, that's really what we're trying to address. It's an offensive line with a ton of upside that I'm pretty confident in, but there's also question marks. And then we also have to, speaking of like steep learning curve and potential for mistakes, we have to address the freshman / first year starters. Now, I'm really talking about Celesi Moa, Savion Hyder, who has a ton of deserved hype coming into the season, and then Andrew Babalola, who's technically not a freshman, redshirted last season, but as a redshirt freshman will be, if he wins the starting left tackle job, which it sounds like he may be winning at this point, he'll be a first year starter as well in a very, very key role at left tackle. We just talked about the offensive line in this video for a reason. These guys are all getting a ton of hype right now, and deservedly so. But I do also think that we need to use a cliche, kind of pump the brakes for just a minute, because as we saw from last season with Bryce Underwood, even the most gifted athletes, and Savion Hyder is certainly a gift from the football gods, as one former coach of this team would say, even he's going to make some mistakes, and I think we have to be prepared for that. Running back isn't all just about making guys miss and being super athletic and breaking tackles, as we saw from Blake Corum. Blake Corum is a perfect example of what I'm talking about here, because he was not the most gifted athlete. He was not even, he got passed over in recruiting because he was a little short. He was a little undersized. He was fast, but he wasn't exactly Chris Johnson out there. He only got a 4th star in recruiting for all those reasons, but he was a great running back. Why? Because he was disciplined and he was smart. And that guy could shake a linebacker out of a gap or trick him into thinking he was getting into one gap and then bouncing back over with that amazing jump cut into another like a pro. And that's why he's a pro now. and you see him make plays for the Los Angeles Rams on any, given Sunday / so far in the preseason. I'm patting myself on the back right now for not saying St. Louis Rams, by the way, though that's probably aging me a bit for you younger people that may be watching this video who probably don't even remember the St. Louis Rams even being a thing. But again, I digress. I just wanted to kind of take a moment in this video and point out the fact that these guys are likely to make some mistakes. And I think we should have some patience for them as they continue to grow and catch up with the speed of college football. Every player that comes into this level from the high school ranks talks about how the speed stands out to them and how hard it is to kind of catch up with that. Now, I may say all this, and then Savion Hyder, in week 2 against Oklahoma, might rack up 100 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. And I'm certainly hopeful that that will happen. But again, for any one thing that can go right, there's 5 or 10 or a million different things that can go wrong, and we should also be prepared for that reality. And that's what I really want to do in this video, is to kind of remind you guys that these are still freshmen at the end of the day. They're likely to, for Savion Hyder, miss an open gap, not make a cut the right way, not see something get blocked out the right way. And then, what looks like it could be an explosive run is a tackle for only 5 yards. Celesi Moa may have some difficulty getting his route timing just right, getting on the same page with Bryce Underwood, yada, yada, yada. And Andrew Babalola may not be ready entirely to block elite defensive linemen, though we'll definitely see with him if he does end up being the starter, because in week 2 Oklahoma has some amazing defensive linemen that he'll be up against. And then my last point I wanted to talk about in this video is kind of a no-brainer. It's Bryce Underwood. This team is going to go as far as Bryce Underwood can carry them. For as much talent as there is on the rest of the roster, the quarterback position remains the most important position in college football. This is the way it is. This is the nature of the way the game is played. Many people, I think actually Bryce Underwood, and I've said it before, he's the most polarizing player in college football right now. I mean, everybody's got an opinion on Bryce Underwood, and none of them fall into the center. It's kind of honestly, it mirrors American politics at the moment, where everyone's either aggressively on the right or aggressively on the left, and there's not many people in the middle. But Bryce Underwood is the centrist, for lack of a better term, and everyone else has got their opinions of why the centrist isn't doing enough, or if they can even do enough. I guess I'm getting into politics here. I guess I should stay away from that largely, but I just find the comparison interesting. Everyone out there either loves or hates Bryce, and there's not much in between, but I guess it kind of comes with the territory of being Michigan's quarterback. You could be Peyton Manning 2.0, you could be Tom Brady 2.0, and Brandon Walker is still going to hate your guts and think you're a bad quarterback. That's just the way the world is. But Bryce Underwood needs to improve this season. I think that's easy to say, right? That's low-hanging fruit for somebody, even for me, right? That's just what is clear and obvious to anyone who watches football on any given Saturday in the big house. The question is, how much will he improve? And will that improvement be enough for this team? Because I've said it before, this team looks like, and we're getting comments from Kyle Whittingham on the daily, that this team looks to be a really great running team, and I think that's what we should all expect with Jordan Marshall, this offensive line continuing to be a better rushing offensive line than it is a pass-blocking offensive line, and Savion Hyder coming in here, and also with Bryce Underwood being somebody who will run the football as well, and even those numbers in the run game at times. But, and we'll especially see this in week 2 against Oklahoma, in my opinion. I'm going to do a big Oklahoma preview video, by the way, after week 1, which is why you should subscribe to this channel. Michigan's only going to go so far as they can get their passing game going, because for as great as a rushing team as they're going to be, teams naturally are going to load the box. They're going to use scrape exchange. They're going to use all the things that modern defensive coordinators have come up with to slow down those read option plays, to slow down things like arc read and midline read and read option and quarterback power and quarterback bash and et cetera, quarterback delay, all those things. They're going to do their best to slow down Michigan's gap scheme running, even their stretch zone that I think they'll actually run a little bit of, because that's what Jason Beck likes to do. They're going to add numbers to the box They're going to get their linebackers flowing and good defenses, which there's plenty of them on the schedule between Phil Parker and Brent Venables and the guys at Indiana and Dan Lanning being a defensive-minded Oregon. And my God, now that I think about it, there are some great defensive teams on the schedule. They're going to challenge Bryce Underwood to beat them with his arm. And why wouldn't they? That's a winning prospect for them from what we've seen. Now, Bryce, to his credit, actually hit quite a few really good throws last season. And there was one stat with Bryce, by the way, that really stood out to me that I saw the other day. Michigan's wide receivers being as bad as they were last season, with like us having to trot out Stamaj Morgan and Channing Goodwin out there last season. They either led or were close to leading the NCAA in dropped passes last season. And if you account for those drops, even if you account for half of those drops, Bryce's completion percentage jumps like 5 points. If you account for all the drops, and now that's kind of impossible. You know, every team's going to have a few drops, but bear with me here. If you account for all those drops and you just count them as completions, as what the experts say, quote unquote, they should have been. And I know this is all subjective, but again, bear with me. Bryce's completion percentage jumps from like 60% to damn near 70%. It jumps to like 69.5%, which would have put him well above average for any college quarterback last season. And I think if we just take a minute and think about that, had he had a performance like that, had he thrown for another 450 more yards, had he had a few more touchdowns, how much more successful would he have been? How many more drives would have been, flipped from just being field goal drives to touchdown drives? How many drives would have been flipped from, not getting any points to at least a field goal? And well, where would Michigan be? Would they have been able to close the gap to teams like Oklahoma and others that they lost to on the schedule? That's an interesting hypothetical in my opinion, but I think it just goes to show going into this season, there is upside with Bryce. It's just a matter of how much he improves, and will it be enough to keep defenses honest, keep them in more too high safety looks, force them to play things like cover two, and have those safeties deep and linebackers accounting for, deep post routes and dagger routes and things like that, dagger concepts, I should say, and really let your running game eat. That's one of the biggest question marks to me of the entire season. And again, I really appreciate you guys watching. Appreciate all of you guys who have subscribed so far. I can't say it enough. I really, really am. I count myself lucky, honestly, that this thing has taken off as much as it has so far. So again, if you don't mind hitting the like button, subscribing. We also have a Discord server, which is really popping off lately. Got a bunch of new people in there. So the link to that will be in the comments. And as always, until next time, be kind to other people out there.